Mars Incorporated, the private company that makes Snickers, Milky Way, and M&Ms, has sales of $16 billion worldwide. An army of warm nougat and caramel marches down a conveyor belt, while hundreds of feet ahead, a flood of chocolate awaits.
Those bars are actually going to flow under a waterfall or curtain of chocolate, someplace that we probably would all like to do sometime in our lives.
Although there's a fantastic aspect to a candy plant that immediately conjures Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, what goes on inside is hardly child's play.
Overall in this plant, we make over 30 million pieces of candy a day. It's a tremendous amount of volume. That would equate to maybe close to 100,000 metric tons a year of product.
It's impossible to know where it all began, but certainly humankind's sweet tooth predates recorded history.
The first caveman, when he went out there looking for something tasty and realized that honey was sweet, and maybe took a stick and poked it in there, you could say that could be the theoretical origin of lollipops, right? Honey on a stick.
Ancient Egyptians, Arabs, and Chinese all made confections from nuts and fruits candied in honey. And by the 17th century, the English were making treats out of boiled sugar. The other mother lode for the world's sweet tooth was the discovery of chocolate. Cocoa trees, the source of chocolate, were being cultivated in Mesoamerica several thousand years ago by the Maya. In 1519, the Aztec ruler Montezuma served Cortez a golden goblet full of a drink called chocolatl, a spiced concoction of ground cocoa beans. Cortez returned to Spain with both the drink's recipe and a supply of beans. Sweetened with cane sugar, the chocolate drink was a hit among European aristocracy.
People started to drink it, and during that time frame, all sorts of weird things were mixed with it. There's some historical information that people mixed blood with it, they mixed licorice with it, they mixed all sorts of things.
But it would take another 300 years for Europeans to manufacture a creamy, solid chocolate. In 1828, C.J. van Houten, a Dutch chocolate maker, invented a manual cocoa press that made this possible. At the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, Milton Hershey purchased German chocolate-making machinery and began producing chocolate bars in his Lancaster, Pennsylvania factory in 1894. The mass-produced American chocolate bar was born.
Milton Hershey is credited with kind of creating the candy bar in the United States. He took milk chocolate and started selling for a nickel a piece.
Since those early days, demand for cocoa has never waned. Today it's grown and harvested as it has been for hundreds of years.
This pod will sit right onto a branch, and it'll sit something like that. And how it's harvested is pretty simplistic. A machete comes by, chops it right off, pod falls to the ground. They take that same machete, chop it, split it open, and inside the pod is something called the placenta. It's a very wet, moist bean. Doesn't even look like a bean.
The beans are fermented to bring out their flavor and then shipped to, among other places, the U.S. division of Mars Incorporated, Master Foods USA. At the factory, the beans are cleaned, roasted, shelled, and ground into a liquid called chocolate liqueur. Presses separate this liquid into cocoa powder and cocoa butter. Chocolate liqueur and additional cocoa butter are the main ingredients of chocolate. Milk solids, sweeteners, and flavors are added to the mix, which is then blended to distribute the cocoa fat in the chocolate. This process is much the same today as it was in 1923, when Frank C. Mars introduced the Milky Way, the nation's first filled candy bar. Mars was a successful candy salesman who had started his business with his wife, Ethel, in their Tacoma, Washington kitchen. But it was the popularity of the chocolate malted milkshake that gave Mars the idea of creating a portable, bite-sized version. The Milky Way bar was an overnight sensation. Mars Incorporated was born. But Frank Mars needed a large plant to keep pace with the demand for his new product.
The reason he chose Chicago was because of its national distribution potential, rail access in and out, bringing raw materials in to make the product, as well as being able to ship the product out by rail.
The history of this particular plant is that we really began production in 1929 with the Milky Way bar, shortly followed in 1930 by the Snickers, and then Three Musketeers bars in 1932.
At the plant, candy manufacture, though scaled up, was still a handmade single-batch process.
If you look at the Chicago factory, and if you look at what it would have been like in the 1930s, it's much like what your kitchen is today, except on a larger scale. Those were mechanical items physically done by hand, which would require someone to mix it first. Then they would have to put the product on a slab, lay that out by hand. They literally would then take a cutter and cut the product by hand. So the continuous processing was the big change that really was the leap forward in being able to mass produce the candy products.
Continuous processing, a series of machines in sequence that move product from mixing through wrapping without stopping, came to the plant in 1947. Today, this process is still used to make all Master Foods products, from M&Ms to Milky Way to these Snickers bars, named after the Mars family's favorite horse.
The first process is really the whipping of egg white along with some cooked corn syrup, which includes some salt and some water and sugar, because we want a high impact of a peanut flavor in Snickers. We're adding fresh ground peanut butter to that mixture. We can't have a great Snickers bar without having great caramel. And it comes into this area, into the blender, where it's now being blended with our own fresh roasted peanuts.
Although the process may look simple, it's not.
Time and temperature are very, very critical components. And for us, monitoring those closely, as well as even basic things like humidity, which could cause the candy to become very sticky and difficult to handle, are all very critical. For a line like this that has a capacity of making 50 or 60 tons of product to ship, you can imagine if one of those parameters would get out of control, you'd have quite a sticky mess in your hands.
The 195-degree nougat flows downstairs and into a hopper. It's then squeezed between two ice-cold stainless steel rollers.
And the material spreads out into a slab that then is peeled off of those rollers and laid down onto a stainless steel belt to be further cooled. And then head towards the area where we can actually put caramel on top.
The combined slab will be cooled further to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, so that it can be cut cleanly into strips the exact width of a Snickers bar, without chocolate on it. The caramel and nougat slab is now warm for enrobing. That's industry speak for getting its chocolate covering. The chocolate has been tempered, heated, and cooled in a way that ensures a more uniform crystallization of cocoa butter within the chocolate, resulting in a higher melting point,
which makes that chocolate easier to handle in your hands at room temperature and at body temperature. Really what we want is we want that chocolate to melt in your mouth, but not in your hands.
Then the bars are vibrated to rid them of air bubbles and to evenly distribute the chocolate. The tempering process continues as the bars head toward wrapping. The Snickers bars receive a final inspection before being wrapped at rates of between 800 and 900 bars per minute. The results of all this work for Master Foods is a spectacular payoff.
The Snicker bar, while invented in 1930, today is one of the top-selling confectionery brands in the world, $2 billion in global sales.
But Snickers is only one of the company's many brands, which include M&M's, Twix, Starburst, Skittles, Milky Way, Kudos, and Three Musketeers. At the Chicago plant, they also make the newest product, the Amazing Bar, a molded milk chocolate bar with embedded M&M's minis. And Poppables, candy bars in a bite-sized format. The company is privately held and run by the fourth generation of the Mars family. With products sold in over 100 countries, they've come a long way from Frank and Ethel Mars's kitchen. The melting point of cocoa butter between 97 and 99 degrees Fahrenheit is right at human body temperature, which is why chocolate melts in your mouth.